Welcome back to Where You Live with Gene and Tony. We're broadcasting from the Concierge Landscape Studios. We're brought to you this second hour by Extreme Exteriors. Before we get into our next topic here, which is a homeowner association in Selbyville, Maryland, are upset. Apparently the developer has finally turned things over to the homeowner association, but some of the contracts that are in place, or one in particular, is a lot higher price than they think ought to be. And they're upset that they were obligated and didn't seem to have a say in this. We're going to be talking with attorney Nancy Palomas from Helmuth and Johnson about this situation because this kind of thing happens in Minnesota too. And we're going to talk about what does Minnesota state statute allow for the association. You may be surprised. But we've got some closing comments here on our story about the harbors in Indiana. A tough situation.
Yeah.
This is definitely, Tony, probably on that top tier of people that are really being difficult with one another.
It like I said, they've taken a step out to the twilight zone. Almost every association we know of has some people that are not happy, of course. There's going to be some people that don't like the situation or don't like the community or don't like the decisions of the board. This particular community, there's been a few individuals that have taken that to a physical level where they've shoved people, they've caused vandalism and damage to property, and they won't stop.
Yeah, they just won't stop until they get their way.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? It sounds like there's several lawsuits going back and forth from both sides. Mm-hmm. There's investigations going on, I believe, in support of the lawsuits. Yeah. What could possibly make this a better situation, Gene?
Well, one thing I think would be maybe a reality check. And this is going to be difficult because you're dealing with people who are adamant that they should get their way each and every time. Yeah. And we don't live in a society where you get your way 100% of the time.
That's right.
Again, it doesn't matter if you're not even living in a homeowner association. You live in a city, you're going to have restrictions of what you can and can't do on your property.
That's right.
And so people, if you are that upset and living in a homeowners association, number one, we've talked about it before, maybe you shouldn't live in one.
Yeah.
I mean, why put yourself in a situation where you're not going to agree with what the majority of other people have to say?
Right.
I was in an association years ago where I had a pet and they changed the rule not allowing dogs anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm a dog lover. Guess what?
Yeah.
I moved.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
because
right.
I couldn't change the board. I tried, but couldn't. So now I moved on.
Right.
And I'm not going to try and just continue to go against that all the time.
It's so frustrating because in this case, in this story, this group of dissenters went to the state legislature and they got legislation passed that gives the Attorney General more control over homeowners associations. Now, our experience with state legislatures is that they don't really understand homeowner associations. They tend to look at them as evil landlords rather than as self-representing governments. And these people that cast themselves as victims and then get Big Brother to pass more rules and more laws, they're kind of operating totally contrary to what they say they want, which is less regulation and less restriction.
That's a great.
It's weird.
It's a great point. People need to realize when you're in a homeowners association, it is same as the state and federal government. You're in a republic, folks, and guess what? You have the power to decide your future and destiny, and you do it at election time by voting.
You choose who represents you. You get to speak your piece. It's probably the one area of your life where you have the most influence, where you can actually talk to someone face to face and say, this is what I believe and this is what I want to see happen. You don't often do that with city council. You don't often do that with your state or federal government.
And a homeowner association is at its most grassroots level, a democracy at work.
That's right. I don't know if they've tried mediation. That might be a possibility. It sounds like someone needs to step in and just just call a halt to all the craziness and make everyone sit down and figure it out.
Yeah.
But I don't know who that person would be.
Unfortunately, what may have to happen is just a wait until some of the key people that are really against one another,
right.
one or two of them will finally leave
Some
and move
attrition.
on, and then all of a sudden there isn't that hopefully that same anger
and
rancor.
There's this vicious cycle going on to where the more publicity they get like this, the more it's hurting the image of their beautiful community and ultimately injuring their property values.
Yeah.
So it's not a good situation.
Well, hey, let's deal with this next story. Tony,
right.
Go ahead. And this is propane deal angers residents.
This is Dateline October 22nd this month. And it comes from Selbyville, Maryland. Residents of Bayview Landing say they're paying more than they should for propane, and they can't do anything about it. John Wood, a member of the committee tasked by the Homeowners Association to look into the issue, said residents of the 220-home development are paying up to $1 more per gallon than the market price for propane. The development has a set of 2,000-gallon tanks that distribute propane to all of the homes. Wood said the issue came up when homeowners decided to contact other propane suppliers due to what they felt were exorbitant heating costs. We're trying to get our best price for heat, especially in these economic times, he said. That's really the crux of this thing. It's not that we dislike our
developer
dislike Sharp. Yeah. No, Sharp is the provider of the propane
vendor.
This is kind of out of order. It's not like we dislike them or this particular system. The only thing we dislike is the cost. As the homeowners were doing their research, they discovered that the developer, McCabe Associates had signed an agreement with Sharp Energy prior to any homes being built that allowed the company to be the development's exclusive propane provider. Details of the contract haven't been released to the public. Sharp Energy President Bob Zola said he's unable to provide the contract because there's a non-disclosure agreement. He said he's tried to reach the developer about removing this clause, but the developer has been on a 3-week cruise. The fact of the matter is that I'm trying to release the contract to the homeowners, he said. The developer's coming back Monday, and that will be our first call. Ron Pickup, former president of the Homeowners Association, said the developer has given a verbal agreement to release the contract and that Sharp Energy is waiting for written word. It's just a matter of getting the written approval from the developer, and then Sharp will release the contract to the community, he said. Hopefully, we'll come to a situation that's agreeable to all. Zola said Sharp Energy typically charges residents of communities 40 to 50 cents below a comparable market cost. The people who have these concerns don't understand the market, he said. Representative Gerald Hocker said residents have come to him with concerns. While he's not seen the agreement, the homeowners should have been well aware that Sharp agreed to put in the infrastructure and that there was an agreement between the company and the developer. So what's this about, Gene? It seems to me that if the developer signed a contract on behalf of the Homeowners Association, once that ownership transfers to the homeowners, are they not now the principals in that contract? I mean, this is kind of crazy that they can't see the contract.
Oh, it is. At any time I've got questions, the person I like to turn to is our next guest, Nancy Palomas with Hellmuth and Johnson. Hello, Nancy.
Hello, Gene and Tony.
Hi, Nancy. Welcome.
Thanks for being on the show.
Sure.
So answer that question for me. When this turned over to the homeowners, why couldn't the homeowners see this contract?
Well, Tony, when I was reading this article, that was one of the things I noted. I have read a number of contracts for utility services with associations, both at their inception and later in their lives, and I have never encountered a non-disclosure provision.
Interesting.
So that it raises some red flags for me because it's odd that it would not be something that they could disclose. But you're right. I mean, if the agreement was entered into by the developer on behalf of the association, then the association is essentially on the hook for the terms of that agreement, and they don't even know what it says.
Now, what is not unusual is that it is very common for a developer to set up an association with a lot of its initial contracts, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that Sharp mentioned in this article is that, the legislative representative mentioned is that many times the vendor will, in exchange for a long-term contract, pay for installation of a lot of the infrastructure for that utility. And absent a long-term contract, the developer would have to pay those costs, which then would no doubt get passed on to the buyers.
There you go.
Now,
sure,
that
makes sense.
We've seen that a lot of times here in Minnesota when a lot of the new construction took place a few years ago. It was common for a cable company to come in and say, we're going to provide this infrastructure and this cabling, but we're going to continue to own that.
And that's probably the most common example. Is any of the cable or satellite communications.
Yeah, because there's a big investment of money
Absolutely.
there to set up the process or set up the equipment necessary to deliver the service. So that makes sense to me. They need to know they're going to have that income for a while.
And simply because it's a 10-year contract doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad deal.
Good point. Good point.
10 years from now, the cost could be significantly higher, and the association will benefit from having locked in a price now. Sometimes it goes the other way, but things rarely get cheaper.
Yeah, that's a good point. We need to take a quick break. You can stay with us, can't you, into the next segment, Nancy?
Absolutely.
Folks, we're talking to attorney Nancy Palomas from Helmuth and Johnson. We're talking about when a developer enters into contracts obligating the association. When we come back, we're going to ask Nancy a little bit more specifically what goes on in the state of Minnesota. What are some of the things that the statute affords homeowners when it comes to contracts? More after these messages.